She's going to kill my daddy. The little girl said it the way children say things they've rehearsed too many times, quiet, flat, like the fear had already burned itself out and left only the fact behind. She was 7 years old, white dress, dark eyes that had no business looking that tired, and she had walked straight across a ballroom full of New York's most powerful people, past senators, past men, whose names never appeared in newspapers, but whose decisions moved entire cities, to say those 5 words to a complete stranger. To Gemma. Of all the people in that room, she chose Gemma. If that just stopped your heart, subscribe right now, hit that bell, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels, because it is only just beginning. Gemma Elliston had not been chosen for anything in a very long time. That was not self-pity. That was just the shape of the life she had built deliberately, carefully, brick by professional brick. You don't survive 10 years as a fixer in Manhattan by being someone people reach for. You survive by being someone people don't notice. The woman near the east wall, the one holding the champagne glass she never drinks from, the one who watches everything and reflects nothing back. She was good at it. She was in fact extraordinary at it, which made it all the more disorienting when a 7-year-old in patent leather shoes walked directly through every invisible wall she owned and sat down beside her like she'd been invited. She's going to kill my daddy. Gemma looked down at the child. Then she looked up, a fast practiced sweep of the room, checking for whoever belonged to this girl, whoever was missing her, whoever was about to appear and reclaim her, with an apologetic smile, and as she says the most dramatic things, you know how kids are. Nobody came. The ballroom continued around them, 500 people, the full orchestra of New York wealth, champagne, and calculation dressed up as charity. Not one person was looking for a missing child. Gemma crouched down slowly, eye level. What's your name? Nola. Nola. She kept her voice the way she kept everything level neutral, giving nothing away. Where is your dad right now? Nola didn't point. She was smarter than pointing. She tilted her chin barely in the direction of the far side of the ballroom, and Gemma followed the angle and found him immediately. You always found Jude Valentine immediately. That was the thing about men like him. They didn't command a room by trying. They commanded it the way a fire commands a room, not by asking, not by demanding, simply by being the thing everything else orients toward. He was standing at the center of a cluster of men in expensive suits, and he was laughing, and even from 50 feet away, Gemma could see that the laugh was completely masterfully hollow. She had read his file 3 times. She knew his name, his holdings, his record, the official one and the real one. She had not been prepared for the physical fact of him. She pulled her attention back to the child. Your daddy, she said. Jude Valentine is your daddy. Nola nodded, patient, like she understood that adults needed a moment to catch up. And you think someone is going to hurt him? Not going to. Nola's voice was very quiet. She already is. She's been doing it for 3 months. 3 months. Not a child's exaggeration, not a bad dream or a misunderstood argument. 3 months, which meant dates, which meant pattern, which meant knowledge. Gemma looked at this girl and something shifted behind her sternum, something that was not professional and was not detached and was not any of the things she had spent a decade perfecting. Tell me what you've seen, she said, and Nola told her. She told her about Monica, about the mornings, about the little bottle with the dark liquid that Monica would bring into the kitchen before anyone was supposed to be awake, before Jude's coffee finished brewing, before the house staff arrived, before the day declared itself. She told her about how she had started waking up early, setting a silent alarm on the old watch her father had given her, creeping down the back stairs to the kitchen doorway and watching through the gap. She had watched it happen 7 times. 7 times. His hands shake now, Nola said. His right hand mostly. He covers it. He puts it in his pocket, or he holds something so people don't see. But I see. A pause. He forgot my teacher's name last week and he'd met her 4 times. He thought it was Tuesday on Thursday. He's not old. He's 41. That's not old. No, Gemma said. Her voice had come out, strange, rougher than she intended. That's not old. He had a doctor appointment. The doctor said it was stress. Nola's eyes did something complicated. Monica drove him. She sat in the waiting room. She brought him coffee in a thermos. The pause that followed was the most articulate silence Gemma had ever witnessed from a human being of any age. From home. Gemma stared at her. She brought him the coffee, she repeated. In the thermos, the blue one. She said it was so he'd have something warm while he waited. Nola looked at her hands then back up. I watched her make it before they left. The room was very loud. The orchestra had shifted to something sweeping and grand, something designed to make wealthy people feel their generosity was historic. Gemma heard none of it. You've told someone, she said. It wasn't a question. A child this methodical carrying this for 3 months, she would have tried. She would have tried more than once. Nola's jaw tightened, just slightly. I told Marcus. He's my dad's driver. He's worked for us since I was born. She stopped. He said I had an overactive imagination and that Monica was going to be my stepmother, and I should give her a chance. Who else? Mrs. Cahill, the housekeeper. She said the same thing, that I was having trouble adjusting. A beat that had iron in it. I'm not having trouble adjusting. My dad is being poisoned. Did you tell your father? Something moved across Nola's face that Gemma felt in her own chest. He sat me down, the girl said, and her voice was perfectly steady in the way that only happens when someone has already cried everything they had about a thing and come out the other side. He told me that he gets lonely, that Monica makes him happy, that I would always be the most important person in his life, but that didn't mean there wasn't room for someone else. She paused. He was being a good dad. He just didn't understand what you were really telling him. He thought I was jealous. She said it without bitterness. Worse than bitterness, actually, she said it with forgiveness, as if she had already processed the injustice of it and made her peace and moved forward. I'm not jealous. I'm not a jealous person. I just don't want him to die. That last sentence landed in the middle of all that ballroom noise like something dropped from a very great height. I just don't want him to die. 7 words, no drama in the delivery, no tears, just the quiet, devastating honesty of a child who had run out of softer ways to say the thing that kept her awake at night. Gemma sat very still for 3 full seconds. Then she said, Why me, Nola? Why did you pick me out of everyone in this room? Nola considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Because you don't belong to his world, she said. Everyone here either works for my dad or wants something from him. You came with someone from the Voss group. She said the name cleanly without stumbling, the way you say the name of a company you've researched. You've been standing near the east wall for 47 minutes. You haven't talked to anyone. You've been watching my dad's business partner for most of the night. Gemma did not move. And, Nola added, you're a woman. Monica doesn't worry about women, she worries about men. She thinks men are the danger. A pause that felt almost clinical. She's wrong about that. A 7-year-old had just identified Gemma's surveillance target, clocked her position for 47 minutes, deduced her professional affiliation, and analyzed the blind spots of the woman she was trying to expose, all while wearing patent leather shoes at a charity gala. Gemma became aware that her mouth was very slightly open and closed it. How long have you been planning this? She asked. Since the 4th time I saw her do it, Nola said. I needed to find the right person. I came to 4 of these events before tonight. She looked at Gemma with those exhausted ancient eyes. You're the right person. You don't know anything about me. I know you're not pretending, Nola said simply. Everyone else in this room is pretending. You're the only one who's actually here. Gemma opened her mouth to say something reasonable, something careful, something that began with, I understand you're frightened, and ended with a gentle redirect toward an adult who was better positioned, better suited, less likely to get herself, and possibly this child killed. She closed her mouth. She opened it again. Show me what you have, she said. Nola reached into the small white purse at her hip. Gemma had not even registered the purse until this moment, and produced a folded piece of paper with the precision of someone completing a transaction they have rehearsed many times. Gemma unfolded it. It was a log, handwritten, dated. 7 entries, each one recording the time Nola had woken up, the time Monica had entered the kitchen, a physical description of the bottle's small, dark glass, no label kept in the left pocket of her gray robe, and what Monica had said to Nola afterward. The exact words, in quotation marks, the name of the coffee, the location of the thermos. Which morning's Jude's symptoms had been noticeably worse. It was meticulous. It was organized. It was the kind of documentation that a trained professional would be proud of. It was written in a child's careful, slightly uneven handwriting. Gemma looked at the list for a long time without speaking. Then very quietly, "Nola, this is you did something extraordinary here. Is it enough to help him? It's enough to start." Gemma Mahala refolded the paper with care, placed it in her clutch. "I need you to listen to me now. What you've described, if it's true, it's true. I believe you." She said it directly, no cushioning, because this child had been cushioned into silence twice already, and it hadn't served either of them. "If it's true, then Monica is dangerous, not just to your father, to anyone she thinks is a threat to what she's doing. Do you understand what I'm saying? She can't know I told anyone." "Exactly right. Which means you go back to him," a small gesture toward Jude Valentine. "Right now, normally. You don't look at me again tonight. You don't acknowledge me. You behave exactly as you were behaving before you walked over here." "I can do that. I know you can." A pause. "I know that because you've been doing it for 3 months." Something crossed Nola's face, relief maybe, or the specific exhaustion of finally having someone understand rather than dismiss, and for just a second she looked exactly her age. Not the careful strategist, not the silent witness, just a 7-year-old who had been carrying something much too heavy for much too long and had just set a small piece of it down. She stood up, smoothed her dress, looked at Gemma one final time. "Her name is Monica Reeves," she said. "She told my dad she was a consultant. She's not. She moved in 3 months ago, and I don't think she has any real friends, and I don't think anyone knows where she came from before she met him." A beat. "I think she picked him." And then she walked away, through the crowd, back to the edge of the room. Within 90 seconds, she was standing near the buffet table, looking precisely like what she was supposed to be, a slightly bored child at an adult event, waiting for the night to be over. Gemma watched her and felt something she hadn't felt in years, something that had no professional category and no practical use and no place in the kind of life she'd built. She felt responsible. She pulled out her phone, kept it low below the table line, typed Monica Reeves into the search window. 11 seconds. The results loaded and Gemma went completely still. Monica Reeves, 43. 3 aliases she could find in 45 seconds of searching, which meant there were more she couldn't. 2 open federal investigations, both closed within 8 months of being open, both citing lack of evidence. A civil suit filed by the family of a man named Gerald Hartwell, 67, who had died 18 months ago after a period of unexplained cognitive decline. The suit had been settled out of court. The settlement amount was sealed. Gerald Hartwell had been Monica's fiancé. Before him, she found this on the 3rd page, buried under layers of name variations, a man named Thomas Wren, 58, retired investment banker, dead 14 months after meeting Monica, cause listed as acute organ failure following prolonged illness. His adult daughter had given a statement to a local paper. The statement had been 2 sentences long. He was completely healthy when she entered his life. He was completely destroyed when she left it. Gemma put the phone face down on the table. She looked across the ballroom at Jude Valentine, who was finishing his conversation, now shaking hands with the careful, deliberate grip of a man who understood that every physical gesture was communication. His right hand was in the handshake. She watched. She waited. There, the faintest tremor as he released. Gone in a quarter second, smoothed over by the natural movement of dropping his arm to his side. He covered it well. He had no idea how little time well might be worth. She looked at Monica. Monica was standing 20 feet from Jude now, watching him finish his conversation, with an expression of warm proprietary pride, the smile of a woman watching her future. She was beautiful in the particular way that some dangerous things are beautiful, precisely, purposefully designed to be the last thing you see clearly before the room goes dark. Her eyes moved a quick automatic sweep and landed for exactly half a second on the table where Nola had been sitting. Empty now. Monica's eyes moved on. Relaxed. Nothing registered. Gemma breathed. She looked down at her clutch where the folded list sat against her phone. She picked him. That was what Nola had said. I think she picked him. Jude Valentine, the most dangerous man in New York, half the judges in the city, federal contacts, an empire built on things that couldn't be spoken in polite company. A man who had survived presumably a great many people who wanted him gone. And this woman had looked at all of that and thought, I can do this. I can get close enough. He won't see it coming. She had been right. So far. Gemma stood up, picked up her clutch, moved toward the exit with the unhurried pace of a woman who had simply decided the evening was over, because the most dangerous thing you can do, leaving a room like this, is look like you're leaving with something. She was leaving with everything. At the door she paused, not to look back. She was too trained for that, but to pull out her phone again. She opened a new note, typed 3 things: Monica Reeves, Gerald Hartwell, Thomas Wren, then below that housekeeper position, Valentine household. How fast can I move? She stepped out into the cold New York air and stood for a moment on the top step looking out at the street, at the waiting cars, and the indifferent city that had no idea what was happening inside that building. Somewhere behind her, inside that ballroom, a little girl in a white dress was standing very still and acting very normal and counting down the minutes until someone finally did something. Gemma had told her yes. In 10 years of fixing things for other people, 10 years of measured responses and calculated extractions, and never ever making promises she hadn't fully stress tested against reality, she had told a 7-year-old yes inside of 12 minutes. She started walking. She had a housekeeper's uniform to find, a background story to build, a name to borrow and a past to construct, and a reason to be inside that house that would hold up under the scrutiny of a woman who had done this before and gotten away with it twice. Jude Valentine was being poisoned by his fiancée. His daughter had chosen Gemma to stop it, and Gemma, against every wall she'd built, against every rule she lived by, against the very architecture of the person she had made herself into, had said yes. She pressed her hand flat against her clutch, felt the folded paper inside. She picked him. Gemma walked faster. Gemma had exactly 72 hours. That was the window she gave herself, not because it was comfortable, not because it was safe, but because beyond 72 hours, the tremor in Jude Valentine's right hand became a variable she could no longer control. She had seen the progression documented in Gerald Hartwell's medical file, which she had pulled through a contact at 3 a.m, sitting at her kitchen table with cold coffee and a growing certainty that what she was walking into was significantly worse than what she had walked away from at the gala. Hartwell had lasted 8 months before his liver failed. Thomas Wren had lasted 14. But Hartwell had been 67 and sedentary. Wren had been 58 and in moderate health. Jude Valentine was 41, and by all external evidence built like a man who had survived things that would have ended most people. That bought him time. Not much, but some. She spent the first 18 hours building the identity. Her name would be Claire Marsh, 44. Originally from Cincinnati, relocated to New York 11 years ago. References from 2 households on the Upper East Side, both real families, both with genuine staff records, she had access to through connections she did not examine too closely in the daylight. A spotless background check, because the one thing she knew about Monica Reeves was that she would run one, and it needed to come back clean in a way that felt earned rather than manufactured. She spent hour 19 on the phone with a woman named Delia, who ran domestic placement for the city's wealthiest households and who owed Gemma a favor that was now approximately 3 years overdue. I need placement, Gemma said. Valentine household, as fast as you can move it. A pause. Gemma, I know what it is. Their housekeeper isn't leaving. Mrs. Cahill has been there since. Mrs. Cahill is 63 and has a sister in Phoenix who just broke her hip. She's been talking about visiting for 2 months. I need you to make it easy for her to go. Another pause, longer this time. I'm not removing her permanently, Delia. I just need her to take a leave, find a temp, make it natural. You're asking me to move pieces on a board I don't understand. I'm asking you to make one phone call to a woman who needs a reason to visit her family. That's it. Silence. Then Claire Marsh. Claire Marsh. I'll have something for you by tomorrow morning. Delia called back at 7:42, not the next morning, but that same night, which meant Mrs. Cahill had been considerably more ready to leave than anyone had anticipated, which itself told Gemma something. A woman who had worked in that house for years and was ready at the first real opening to walk out the door. People who were comfortable didn't do that. People who were uncomfortable, who felt something shifting in the walls around them, but couldn't name it, who were quietly, persistently unsettled. Those people left the moment the door opened. Mrs. Cahill knew something was wrong. She just hadn't known what to do with it. Gemma filed that. It was useful. She arrived at the Valentine estate on a Thursday morning, which was what Delia had arranged, and she stood at the service entrance with her single bag and her borrowed identity, and every nerve in her body pulled to its full extension, and she rang the bell. The woman who answered was not Monica. She was young, early 20s, a household assistant named Petra, who had wide eyes and the slightly compressed energy of someone perpetually braced for criticism. She looked at Gemma with transparent relief, which confirmed two things immediately. The house had been without a primary housekeeper for exactly 4 days, and those 4 days had not been easy. Mrs. Cahill left so suddenly, Petra said, leading her inside, talking too fast in the way that people do when they have been alone with something uncomfortable for too long. She didn't say much. She just said her sister needed her and she had to go. We've been managing, but Mr. Valentine has meetings 3 times a week here and the standard is very... She stopped herself, recalibrated. You come highly recommended. I try to be useful, Gemma said simply. She spent the first hour doing exactly what a new housekeeper would do, learning the house. Not the layout she had studied the floor plan 2 nights ago, but the rhythms, where people moved, which rooms were used and which were performative, where the staff went when they weren't needed, and how quickly they could materialize when they were. She cataloged all of it with the practiced attention she had spent 10 years developing, and she did it while asking completely normal questions about linen inventory and the preferred brand of cleaning solution, and whether Mr. Valentine took his breakfast in the dining room or the kitchen. Petra answered everything. She was forthcoming in the way that lonely people are slightly too much information, slightly too eager, grateful for the audience. It was on the 4th question, something innocuous about whether the household followed a weekly menu plan, that Petra's energy changed. Not dramatically, just a fraction. The way a room changes when someone enters it who the room doesn't entirely belong to. Gemma heard heels on the hardwood before she saw her. Monica Reeves was smaller in person than she had appeared across a ballroom. Not physically smaller, she was the same height, the same composed elegance, but something about proximity reduced the performance of her. Up close, Gemma could see the precision of her, the way nothing about her was accidental. The hair, the posture, the way she paused in the doorway with her coffee cup, the specific coffee cup, not a random mug, but the expensive ceramic one that Gemma had already noted sat in the second cabinet on the left, held at exactly the angle that communicated ease without communicating carelessness. This was a woman who had practiced being Monica Reeves for a very long time. You must be the temp, she said. Her voice was warm, practiced warm. Claire Marsh, Gemma said. She extended her hand. I know it's abrupt timing. I hope I can make the transition as smooth as possible. Monica's handshake was brief, evaluating. Her eyes moved over Gemma in the 2 seconds of the handshake with the efficiency of a scanner-age appearance threat-level utility. Gemma had been assessed by professionals. Monica was very good, but she was looking for a specific kind of threat, and Gemma was not presenting as that kind. Jude runs a very particular household, Monica said. She had moved to using his first name immediately, which was its own statement. Standards are high. Mrs. Cahill had been here long enough to know them instinctively. You'll need to learn quickly. I generally do, Gemma said. Monica looked at her for 1 beat longer than was strictly necessary, and then she smiled, the warm, empty smile Gemma had cataloged, from across the ballroom and said, Good, and turned and walked away. Petra beside Gemma exhaled very quietly. Gemma noted that too. The first day passed without incident, which was exactly what she needed, and also exactly what she found hardest. She had built an entire operational mindset around movement, around gathering, around turning information into action. Standing in a kitchen folding linens while the clock moved slowly forward was its own kind of discipline. She did it. She did it without letting any of the urgency she felt reach her hands or her face or the pace at which she moved through rooms. She saw Nola at 3:45 in the afternoon. She had been prepared for this, had rehearsed her own response to it, had constructed the exact expression and the level of warmth that a new housekeeper would extend to the child of the household, friendly but professional, interested but not eager. She had the response fully built and ready. It dissolved the moment she saw Nola's face, because Nola saw her and went completely still. And in the stillness, just for a fraction of a second before the girl pulled it back and smoothed it over with the practiced composure that Gemma was beginning to find both extraordinary and heartbreaking, there was something raw and enormous. Relief so total it looked almost like pain. "She found you," that expression said. "You actually came." Gemma did not break. She smiled the smile she had prepared, warm, appropriate new employee meeting the child, and said, "You must be Nola. I'm Claire. I'll be helping out while Mrs. Cahill is away." Nola looked at her. "Hi," she said. Her voice was perfectly normal. "Do you need anything?" "No, thank you." A pause calibrated to exactly the length a child's pause should be. "It's nice to meet you, Claire." She walked past and went upstairs, and Gemma did not watch her go, and neither of them indicated by even a single degree of body language that they had ever seen each other before that moment. Two professionals. One of them was 7 years old. It was that night, her first night in the house, that Gemma set her alarm for 4:15 in the morning. She had placed herself in the staff quarters on the third floor closer to the back stairs than the front, which gave her 2 routes down and 1 route that Monica, whose room was on the second floor east wing, would be unlikely to use. She had timed the distance to the kitchen doorway at 38 seconds, moving quietly. She had identified the exact spot Nola had described the doorway gap, the angle from which you could see the counter by the coffee machine without being visible from the kitchen entrance. She lay in the dark and did not sleep and waited for 4:15. The alarm went off. She silenced it before the second pulse. She was already awake. She moved down the back stairs in the dark without using her phone light. She had walked the route 4 times during the day under various pretexts, and she knew it the way. You know, a thing you've made your body learn rather than your mind. 34 seconds. She was faster than she'd timed, which meant she was nervous, and she made herself slow down. She reached the doorway. She stopped. She waited. For 11 minutes, nothing. The house settling, the refrigerator's low hum, the specific quality of silence that very large, very expensive houses have, not empty silence, but weighted silence, the silence of a space that holds too much. Then she heard it, footsteps. Not hurried, unhurried, in the deliberate way of someone who has done this enough times that the urgency has been replaced by routine. A door, a soft click, heels on hardwood, then the transition to the kitchen tile, a different sound, softer. Monica was wearing the gray robe, the left pocket. Gemma watched. She watched Monica move to the coffee machine with the ease of someone in their own kitchen, which of course she was, or intended to be, and start the brew cycle and then reach into the left pocket and take out the bottle. Small, dark glass, no label. She held it for a moment, and Gemma watched her face, which was the thing she'd really come to see, the thing no evidence log could capture, and Monica's expression was nothing. Not guilty, not conflicted, not the face of someone doing something they knew was wrong and felt the weight of. It was the face of someone completing a task, efficient, focused. That was the most frightening thing Gemma had witnessed in 10 years of witnessing frightening things. She counted the drops. 7. Into the reservoir of the machine, not the cup, which was methodical, which was controlled dosing across the full brew, which was the work of someone who understood what they were doing and had thought carefully about it. 7 drops. Monica replaced the bottle, smoothed the front of her robe, called up the stairs in a voice that was warm and domestic and completely perfectly normal. "Jude, coffee's on." Gemma did not move for 45 seconds after Monica left the kitchen. Then she walked in, crouched in front of the cabinet beneath the coffee machine, and confirmed without touching that the bottle was there, left side of the cabinet behind the spare filters. Exactly where Nola had said. She took 3 photographs. She stood up. She went back upstairs. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark for a long time, and she thought about what she'd just seen and what it meant and how fast she needed to move. The answer to the last question was faster than she'd planned, because that morning at 7:12, when she brought the breakfast tray to the dining room and set it down without meeting anyone's eyes, she saw Jude Valentine's right hand around his coffee cup, and the tremor was not faint anymore. It was controlled. It was suppressed, and he was working very hard to suppress it, but it was there in a way that 3 days ago it might not have been. Worse than the gala. Worse than last week. She set the tray down and said, "Good morning, Mr. Valentine." And he said morning without looking up from the documents in front of him, and she walked out of the dining room and stood in the hallway and made a decision. Not 72 hours. She had 48, maybe less. She called her contact at the private toxicology lab she had used twice before from the back stairwell at 8:45 when Monica was in a phone call upstairs and Petra was running an errand. She spoke for 4 minutes. She gave the description of the bottle. She gave the dosing pattern, 7 drops daily into a full pot of coffee. She gave the symptom profile. She listened. The silence on the other end of the line lasted long enough to make her stomach tighten. "Gemma," her contact said finally, "tell me. Based on what you're describing, the tremor, the cognitive gaps, the timeline that's consistent with a heavy metal compound, probably thallium-based, slow accumulation, low enough per dose that standard blood work won't catch it unless they're specifically looking." A pause. "It's designed to look like neurological decline, natural onset, something that builds slowly enough that by the time anyone thinks to test for it, the damage is, how long does he have if the dosing continues at this level?" Another silence. Longer. 4 to 6 weeks before the damage becomes irreversible. Gemma pressed her hand flat against the wall. "And if the dosing stops now, depending on current accumulation, he'd need chelation therapy started as soon as possible. But if you stop it now before it goes further," he paused, "he could recover. Most of it, maybe all of it." She hung up. She stood in the back stairwell of Jude Valentine's house with her hand still pressed against the wall, and she thought about a little girl in a white dress who had walked across a ballroom with a folded piece of paper and said, "I just don't want him to die. He could recover if she moved now." The problem, the part she had been avoiding thinking about clearly, the part she had been circling in her mind for 2 days without landing on it, was this: to stop it, she needed Jude Valentine to know. And to tell Jude Valentine, she needed to tell him as herself. Not as Claire Marsh household temp, not with a story she'd built in 72 hours. As Gemma Elliston, the woman his daughter had approached at a charity gala because she was the only person in the room who wasn't pretending. And the moment she did that, Monica would know. And the moment Monica knew, Gemma heard a sound on the stairs above her and moved instinctively smoothly back into the posture of someone who had simply stepped aside to take a personal call. She tucked her phone away and looked up. Nola was standing on the step above her. They were alone in the stairwell. Nola looked at her with those eyes, the ones that were always measuring, always assessing, and said very quietly, "You saw her, didn't you, this morning?" "Yes." "And you know what it is now?" Gemma looked at her. "Yes." Nola sat down on the step, just sat down right there in the stairwell, with her knees pulled up and her arms around them. And for a moment, just one, she looked exactly her age. Not the strategist, not the witness, just a child who was very, very tired. "When are you going to tell him?" she asked. "Soon." "How soon, Nola?" "He had a headache this morning that lasted 2 hours. He thought I didn't notice." She looked up at Gemma with an expression that had no performance in it at all, just the stripped-down truth of it. "I notice everything. I've been noticing everything for 3 months because there was no one else to notice." Her voice didn't crack. It was worse than cracking. It was steady. "Please, how soon?" Gemma sat down on the step beside her, not beside her like a professional making a calculated gesture. Beside her like a person sitting next to another person who needed someone next to them. "Tonight," she said. "I'll find a way to tell him tonight." Nola looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded once with the gravity of someone who has been given a commitment and intends to hold the other person to it completely. "Okay," she said. She unfolded herself from the step, straightened, and she walked back up the stairs, looking once again like a child who had simply been passing through. Gemma stayed on the step for another moment. Tonight. Which meant she had to find a way to get Jude Valentine alone, without Monica in the room, without alerting anyone, without blowing a cover that was the only thing currently standing between her and a woman who had killed twice already and would not hesitate to make it 3. She stood up, smoothed her uniform, picked up the small basket she'd been carrying as her pretense. She had 7 hours. She started planning. 7 hours became four the moment Monica announced at lunch that she had made dinner reservations for herself and Jude at 8 o'clock. Gemma heard this from the kitchen, where she was preparing the afternoon coffee service, the decaffeinated version she had quietly substituted into the canister that morning, buying Jude's body one day without an additional dose, while she figured out how to tell him there had been doses at all. She heard Monica's voice carry from the sitting room with the particular clarity of someone who was not trying to be overheard, but was not trying not to be either. 8 o'clock at Carmine's, I already confirmed. We need the evening out, Jude. You've been so tired lately. And then Jude's voice lower, slightly rougher than it had sounded even 2 days ago. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're running yourself into the ground. A pause, and in the pause, Gemma heard the specific warmth Monica deployed. Not real warmth, but the performance of it, precise and practiced. Let me take care of you tonight. Gemma set the coffee pot down very carefully. 4 hours. If they left at 7:30, she had from now until 7:30 to find a way to get Jude alone, and not just alone in a way that would make him listen, not call for security, not look at the household temp who had been in his house for 36 hours and conclude that she was a problem to be removed. The problem was she had no reason to approach him. Housekeepers did not approach. Housekeepers appeared when summoned, completed their function, and disappeared. Any deviation from that, any direct request for his time, any manufactured urgency would be visible. And Monica was watching everything with the low, constant attention of someone who had learned that the details were where things went wrong. Gemma needed a reason that was natural. That came from the house. That required his attention specifically and couldn't be redirected to Monica or Petra. She was still turning this over at 2:45 when Nola solved it for her. She didn't announce what she was doing. She simply appeared in the kitchen doorway, looked at Gemma with those measuring eyes, and said at full volume with the perfect casualness of a child asking a reasonable question. Claire, my dad said there's a problem with the boiler documentation. He needs someone to pull the maintenance records from the household files. Do you know where Mrs. Cahill kept the physical files? Gemma looked at her. I believe they're in the study. My dad's in the study. A pause precisely calibrated. He said he'd look himself, but he can't find the folder. Monica was in the sitting room, 12 feet away, audible range. Gemma could feel the attention from there, the slight shift in ambient sound that happened when someone stopped whatever they were doing and listened without indicating they were listening. I'll bring them to him, Gemma said, neutral, domestic, unremarkable. She pulled a random manila folder from the kitchen records drawer, utility invoices, something close enough to credible, and walked to the study. She knocked, opened the door. Jude Valentine was at his desk, and he looked up, and Gemma saw it in the 3 seconds before he rearranged his expression into something more composed to the exhaustion. Not tiredness, exhaustion in the cellular sense, the kind that lived in the eyes and in the set of the jaw, and in the way a person held themselves when holding themselves upright had become an act of will rather than a habit. He was worse than he'd looked at breakfast, and he didn't know it. Gemma closed the door behind her. She crossed the room, set the folder on the desk, and then she did not leave. Jude looked at her with the mild, absent attention of someone waiting for the help to exit. Mr. Valentine, she said quietly, I need you to listen to me very carefully, and I need you not to react visibly because I believe the door isn't fully closed, and I cannot guarantee we're not being heard. Everything in Jude's face changed. Not dramatically, this was a man who had survived in dangerous rooms for 20 years by not reacting dramatically. But his eyes sharpened in a way that cleared the exhaustion from them immediately, and his body stilled, and Gemma understood in that moment exactly how he had survived this long. Who are you, he said. Not a question, a statement with a question's shape. My name is Gemma Elliston. I'm not a housekeeper. I was at the Whitmore Foundation Gala 6 days ago. She watched his face. Your daughter approached me. She told me what she'd been watching for 3 months. Silence. The particular silence of a man processing something that is rewriting the last 6 days in real time. Nola, he said. She came to me because she had nowhere else to go. She had tried Marcus and Mrs. Cahill, and both of them told her she was imagining things. Gemma kept her voice at the low, flat register of someone delivering facts rather than arguments. She wasn't imagining things. I've confirmed it. I was in the kitchen doorway at 4:15 this morning. I watched Monica put 7 drops of a clear liquid into your coffee reservoir from a dark glass bottle she keeps in the cabinet below the machine. I have photographs. I have a toxicology consultation that indicates the symptom profile, the tremor, the cognitive gaps, the fatigue is consistent with thallium-based compound. Slow accumulation, designed to present as natural neurological decline. Jude did not move. My contact says if dosing stops now and you begin chelation therapy immediately, you recover. Most of it, possibly all. She paused. If dosing continues for another 4 to 6 weeks, the damage becomes irreversible. The silence stretched. Outside the door, nothing. The houses waited quiet. Then Jude Valentine said very softly with a control that was almost frightening, "My daughter has known this for 3 months. Yes. She's been watching this woman poison me for 3 months and she couldn't." He stopped. His jaw worked for a moment. She couldn't get anyone to believe her. No. Something moved through his face that Gemma had not expected. Not rage. Rage would have been easier to read. This was something more interior. Something that had the shape of a man understanding all at once what his 7-year-old daughter had been carrying while he was sitting across the breakfast table from her, telling her to give Monica a chance. She came to a gala by herself, he said. She came to 4 of them, looking for the right person. And you're... He stopped again, looked at her with the eyes that had sharpened past exhaustion into something very clear and very cold. "You're a fixer. Voss Group." She didn't confirm it. She didn't need to. Why, he said. "You have no obligation to me. You were there for something else entirely." "Your daughter asked me to help you," Gemma said. That was sufficient. Another silence. Jude looked at the folder she had set on his desk, the prop, the fiction, the manufactured reason for this conversation, and then he looked back at her. "Monica cannot know," he said. "I know. If she suspects for even a moment that I..." He stopped. Something crossed his face. The cold calculation of a man who had operated in dangerous spaces for a long time, running up against something he had no prepared response for, the knowledge that the person closest to him, the person sleeping in his house, the person he had been planning to marry had been methodically ending his life. "She'll run," he said, "or she'll accelerate. Either way she becomes unpredictable," Gemma finished, "which is why we can't let her know. You go to dinner tonight. You behave exactly as you have been. You give her nothing." "And Nola?" "Nola has been giving her nothing for 3 months," Gemma said. "She knows how." Something moved through his expression at that something that was grief, she thought, though he would not have called it that. The grief of a father understanding too late that his child had been protecting him when it should have been the other way around. "What do you need from me?" he said. It was the voice of someone who had absorbed a devastating thing and was already moving past the absorbing into the doing, because that was how he had survived this long, by converting every devastating thing immediately into an operational question. "Tonight after dinner, make a reason to spend 30 minutes alone in the kitchen. Tell her you want tea. Tell her you want to read anything that puts you in that room by yourself. I'll be here. I'll pull the bottle. I'll photograph it again with a timestamp, and then I'll replace it with something inert. You'll swap it. Same bottle, same color liquid, no active compound. She'll dose tomorrow morning. She'll see what looks like normal routine. She'll have no reason to suspect anything has changed." Gemma kept her voice even. "That buys us 48 hours to get you to a doctor, start the chelation, and build enough documented evidence to ensure that when this ends, it ends completely." Jude was quiet for a moment. "Then you said she's done this before." 2 confirmed prior cases. Gerald Hartwell, Thomas Wren, both dead. The name Hartwell landed visibly. Jude's eyes moved just slightly with the recognition of someone placing a name they had heard before in a context where they hadn't expected to find it. "You know that name," Gemma said. "Hartwell had a daughter. She made noise about it for a while." His voice had gone very flat. "Monica told me the family was litigious, that Hartwell had been sick for years before Monica knew him, that they were looking for someone to blame." He stopped. "She told me that story within the first month of our relationship. He had been set up to dismiss it before he ever heard it." Gemma watched him absorb this. Watch the man who controlled half of New York understand that he had been managed from the very beginning with more patience and precision than most of his enemies had ever shown. That Monica Reeves had constructed his blindness deliberately stone by stone before he'd even thought to look. She's better at this than most professionals I've encountered, Gemma said. Not to comfort him, because it was true and he needed to understand it. She has been doing this for a long time. She is not going to be caught by accident. It has to be deliberate, documented, and airtight. I understand airtight, Jude said. His voice had gone somewhere very quiet. I know you do. She picked up the folder. Preparation to leave natural timing. Go to dinner. Act tired that should not be difficult. Come home, 30 minutes in the kitchen. I'll do the rest. She moved toward the door. Elliston, she stopped. My daughter. He said it like it cost something. She's been remarkable, Gemma said simply. She has been more careful and more methodical and more courageous than most adults I have ever worked with. You should know that. She paused. She was terrified the whole time. She just didn't let it stop her. She opened the door and walked out, and she did not look at Monica as she passed the sitting room doorway, and Monica did not call after her, and the house held its silence. The dinner reservation was for 8. They left at 7:40. Gemma watched from the upstairs window, not to confirm departure. She had heard the car, but to give herself a moment to simply stand still and breathe before what came next. She turned from the window and went downstairs. Petra had gone home at 6. The house was empty except for Gemma and one remaining security presence on the exterior, which was standard and which she had already assessed as non-interfering with her interior movement. She went to the kitchen. She opened the cabinet below the coffee machine. The bottle was there. She photographed it. Timestamp confirmed. She pulled out the replacement she had prepared that afternoon. Identical dimensions, identical dark glass sourced from a supply store 3 blocks away, filled with a saline solution that was visually indistinguishable from the original, and she set both bottles on the counter. She opened the original. The smell was faint, chemical in a way that had no natural analog, the way truly dangerous things often had no natural analog because nature had never needed to produce them. They were invented specifically for damage. She transferred a small sample to the collection vial she'd gotten from her contact, sealed it, labeled it, put it in her pocket. Then she took the replacement bottle, placed it exactly where the original had been left, pocket angle, same depth, same orientation, and she photographed it in place. She stood up with the original bottle in her hand, and the kitchen light came on. Gemma did not move. She did not turn around. She ran the calculation in exactly the 2 seconds she had before turning would become its own signal. Monica and Jude had left 37 minutes ago. Dinner reservation, 8 o'clock, 15-minute drive. They were not back. Petra was gone. Security was exterior. She turned around. Nola was standing in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, bare feet, hair loose, holding her old watch. For one complete second, Gemma's heart restarted. You scared me, she said, quietly, without blame. I couldn't sleep, Nola said. She looked at the bottle in Gemma's hand. She looked at Gemma's face. You got it. Yes. Nola was quiet for a moment, processing this with the same compressed intensity she brought to everything. Then she said, Did you tell him? This afternoon, in the study. What did he say? Yeah. Gemma looked at her, this child in her pajamas who had started this, who had carried it for 3 months and handed it off to a stranger and then waited with a patience that should not have been possible for someone her age, and said, He said he understood. Did he? Nola stopped, started again. Did he say anything about me? The question was so carefully constructed that it almost disguised what was underneath it. Almost. But Gemma heard what was underneath it, the thing that was not about the evidence or the plan or the operational timeline. The thing that was just a child asking whether her father had finally understood what she had been doing. He said, You were remarkable, Gemma said. Those were his words, and she paused, finding the right one. He was undone by it, in the way that people are when they realize someone they were supposed to be protecting was out there protecting them instead. Nola looked down at her watch. She did the thing with her jaw that Gemma had learned meant she was holding something in rather than letting it through. He was never going to believe me, she said. It wasn't accusation. It was just the clean, arrived at understanding of someone who had worked through a thing completely. Not because he doesn't love me, because Monica made sure that anything I said would already have an explanation. She was very smart about it. Yes, she was. But she didn't account for me going outside the house. Nola looked up. She was watching everyone inside. She wasn't watching the gala. A 7-year-old had found the blind spot in a professional predator's operational perimeter. No, Gemma said. She wasn't watching the gala. Nola nodded slowly, then she said, "What happens now?" "Now your father comes home and I give him back a kitchen that has nothing dangerous in it, and tomorrow morning Monica doses his coffee and nothing happens, and in 48 hours we have enough to make sure she never does this to anyone else. And my dad gets better." "Yes." "You're sure?" "I spoke to a doctor. If the dosing has stopped, and it has, I've been substituting since this morning, and he starts treatment in the next few days." "Yes, he gets better." She paused. "Most people don't get a window like this. Your timing," she stopped. "You saved his life, Nola. I want you to understand that. Not me. You." Nola stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she crossed the kitchen and sat down at the kitchen table, not asking, same as she had at the gala, just deciding. And she put her elbows on the table and her face in her hands, and she sat there very quietly for about 15 seconds. When she looked up, her eyes were dry. But the exhaustion in them was so total, so deep, that it was like looking at someone who had been running for 3 months and had just for the first time been allowed to stop. "I'm really tired," she said. "I know," Gemma said. "I've been so careful for so long." She said it simply. "Every morning I wake up and the first thing I think is, did she do it today? Did he drink it today? Is he worse today? And then I go downstairs and I watch his hands and I count his words and I—" She stopped. "I'm 7. The last 2 words came out different from the others. Not complaint. Just facts stated with the specific sorrow of someone who had been forced too far outside of what they were supposed to be for too long." Gemma sat down across from her. "You're 7, she said, "and what you did was not something most grown adults would have the courage or the clarity to do. Both of those things are true at the same time." Nola looked at her for a long moment. "Are you going to leave when this is over?" The question came out of nowhere and landed directly in the center of something Gemma had not yet examined in herself. She held it for a second before answering. "I'll have to go back to my actual life eventually," she said carefully. "Yes." "Oh." Nola looked down at the table. "Okay." It was the smallest possible response to the largest possible feeling, delivered with the restraint of a child who had learned not to ask for things she didn't think she was allowed to want. Gemma opened her mouth. The front door opened. She was on her feet before the sound finished. Bottle in her pocket, sample vial, secured, nothing on the counter that shouldn't be there. She was already moving toward the sink, filling the kettle, when Monica and Jude came in from the hallway, and she heard Monica's voice, tighter than usual, slightly controlled, saying, "I'm just saying you were quiet all through dinner, Jude. I told you, headache. You always have a headache lately." A pause, and in it, Gemma heard the thing Monica was doing, the gentle reframe, the soft installation of the narrative she needed him to hold. "You're declining, you're tired. You need me. I'm worried about you." "I'm fine." They passed the kitchen doorway. Monica's eyes swept the room in her automatic, unconscious way, the sweep Nola had clocked and timed and described at a charity gala 6 days ago, and found Gemma at the kettle, and found Nola at the table, and found nothing else of consequence. "Nola, what are you doing up?" Monica said. Warm, maternal, perfect. "Couldn't sleep," Nola said. She looked at Monica with an expression of complete, uncomplicated normality. "Claire made me chamomile." Gemma set the mug on the table in front of Nola without being asked. Unhurried, domestic, a housekeeper completing an obvious task. Jude Valentine stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at his daughter. Something passed between them. Something that had no words and needed none. Something that was built from the ruins of 3 months of misunderstanding and the sudden devastating clarity that had replaced it, and Nola held his eyes with the steadiness of someone who had waited a long time for this moment and was not going to waste it. He crossed the kitchen, he crouched down beside her chair, and he put his arms around her with the urgency of a man who had only just understood how close he had come to not being able to do this anymore, And Nola, who had been so careful, so controlled, so thoroughly professional for 3 months, pressed her face into his shoulder and held on with both hands. Monica watched from the doorway. Gemma kept her back to the room, her hands at the sink, and she watched Monica's reflection in the dark window above it. Monica's face, unobserved, was very still, not moved by the embrace, not softened. Simply calculating, reading the scene for information, for deviation, for anything that suggested the equilibrium had shifted. Her eyes moved to Gemma. In the window's reflection, they held for exactly 3 seconds. Gemma did not look away. She gave Monica nothing, no discomfort, no guilt, no recognition. Just the neutral, slightly absent expression of a housekeeper doing the washing up while her employers had a family moment. Monica's gaze moved on, but in those 3 seconds, Gemma had understood something new. Monica was not certain, but she was not comfortable either. Something not evidence, not proof, just the animal instinct of a predator who has survived by paying attention to small wrongnesses had shifted in her. She would be watching more carefully now, moving more carefully, possibly reconsidering her timeline, which meant Gemma's 48 hours had just become 24. She turned off the tap, dried her hands, set the dish towel down with the deliberate, unhurried movement of someone whose only concern was whether the kitchen was tidy. "Good night," she said to no one in particular, and walked out. She was halfway up the back stairs when she heard Monica say quietly to Jude, "I don't know about her. Something feels off." And Jude's voice, even quieter, careful, "She's fine. She came highly recommended." "It's not about recommendations, Jude. It's instinct." A pause. "I'll look into it," he said. Gemma kept walking, up the stairs, into the dark of the 3rd floor. She sat on the edge of her bed and she pulled out her phone and she typed one message to the toxicology contact, 3 words. "Move it up." She sent it, put the phone face down, pressed both hands flat on her knees and breathed. Monica's instinct was live. Jude was covering. But Jude was exhausted and compromised and carrying the weight of what he'd learned this afternoon on top of 3 months of accumulated poison, and a man in that condition, however experienced, could not perform indefinitely. 24 hours, maybe less. Whatever was going to break soon. The only question now was whether Gemma could get everything in place before Monica Reeves decided that the timeline she had been running so patiently for 3 months needed to be accelerated. Because if Monica accelerated, if she stopped the slow work and moved to something faster, something final, then the bottle in Gemma's pocket and the photographs on her phone and the sample at the lab were going to be evidence without a living subject to save. Gemma looked at the ceiling in the dark for a long moment. Then she got up and started preparing for tomorrow. She did not sleep. Not because she couldn't. She had trained herself years ago to sleep in hostile environments, in borrowed rooms, in houses that didn't belong to her, but because somewhere around 2 in the morning she heard Monica's door open and close, and after that sleep was not a serious option. She lay still and listened. Footsteps. Not toward the kitchen. The kitchen was 2 floors down and she would have heard the direction. These moved along the 2nd floor hallway. Slow, unhurried, thinking footsteps, the kind that belonged to someone who was awake not because something had happened, but because something was being decided. Gemma counted the minutes, 11. Then the footsteps returned and the door opened and closed again, and the 2nd floor went quiet. She stared at the ceiling. Monica was recalculating. That was what those 11 minutes were. Not insomnia, not restlessness, calculation. The kind that happened when something small had shifted in the environment, and a person who survived by reading small shifts needed to decide whether it meant anything. Gemma had given her nothing concrete, she was certain of that. But Monica did not operate on concrete. She operated on instinct, which was in some ways more dangerous than evidence, because instinct could not be argued with or disproven. You couldn't show instinct a clean background check and watch it relax. At 4, she got up. Not for the kitchen, she had already handled the kitchen. The bottle was swapped, the decaf substitution was holding, but because lying still while the situation evolved around her was not something she was built to do. She pulled out her phone. 2 messages from her toxicology contact. The first confirmed receipt of the sample and estimated a 6-hour turnaround for full compound identification. The second, sent 40 minutes later, said only, "Call me when you're clear." She went to the back stairs, sat on the top step, dialed. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he'd been awake too. "Tell me," she said. "It's thallium sulfate, Pharmaceutical grade, not industrial. Someone with access to a supply chain that isn't available over a counter. He paused. Gemma, this is not something you improvise. This compound at this purity, someone made a connection. Someone who knew what they were doing gave this to her. She has resources. She has more than resources. She has a supplier, which means this is larger than one woman with a grudge in a bottle. Another pause. Are you somewhere safe? Relatively. That's not a yes. I'm aware. She kept her voice at the register that didn't carry. What I need from you is documentation. Full compound analysis time-stamped with your signature. And the clinical comparison to Hartwell's final blood work, if you can get it. I can get it. Give me until noon. I need it by 9. Silence. Gemma. 9, she said. Please. He exhaled. 9. She hung up, sat on the step for a moment in the dark. Pharmaceutical-grade thallium sulfate with a non-standard supply chain, which meant Monica Reeves was not working alone, had perhaps never been working alone. And the question of who was behind her was a question that opened into a much larger dark than Gemma had been looking at. She filed it. She could not solve everything before 9 o'clock. She needed to solve the immediate problem first. She went back to her room. She sat at the small desk and opened her laptop and pulled up everything she had compiled on Monica in the past 6 days, and she read it again with the new layer, not a woman operating independently, but a woman operating within a structure. And as she read things she had categorized as coincidence, rearranged themselves into pattern. The timing of Monica's appearance in Jude's life. 18 months ago, at a private investment dinner hosted by a man named Carl Briggs, who ran import operations in the outer boroughs, and who had, according to Gemma's research on Jude's business associates, been quietly contesting Jude's control of 2 distribution networks for the past 3 years. Monica Reeves had been introduced to Jude Valentine by a man who wants Jude Valentine removed. She closed the laptop, put both palms flat on the desk, breathed. This was not a crime of passion or greed. This was a contract. Monica was a professional, and someone had pointed her at Jude the same way you pointed any professional at a target with specific intent and adequate resources and a clear desired outcome. Which meant the moment Monica reported that her cover was compromised, the outcome would be sought by other means. She had not been thinking large enough. She pulled her phone back out and called a different number. One she used considerably less often, one that required a level of trust she was not casual with. A man named Rourke answered. He was not someone she would describe warmly. He was someone she would describe as effective. I need containment, she said. One subject female currently resident at the Valentine address in the Upper East Side. I need her secured and unable to communicate externally starting at, she checked the time, starting at 7 this morning. That's a 4-hour window, Rourke said. Can you do it? Depends on what you mean by secured. Detained, legally if possible. I'll have documentation by 9 that supports a criminal hold. In the Valentine angle. He's the victim. He'll cooperate. She paused. He'll more than cooperate. A moment. 7 o'clock. Thank you. She hung up, and for the first time in 24 hours, felt the shape of the next 12 hours solidify from something she was managing moment to moment into something with an actual structure. 7 o'clock. Documentation by 9. Rourke's people in place. Jude briefed before Monica woke up. She had 4 hours. She spent one of them writing. Not the documentation that was coming from the lab, but the narrative. The clear sequenced account of everything she had witnessed, everything Nola had recorded, every date and time, and observed detail that could be corroborated. She wrote it the way she would present it to someone who needed to act on it, which was how she wrote everything, without emotion, without color, with only the facts in their correct order and the evidence attached to each one. When she was done, it was 5:47. She read it once, changed 2 words. Then she printed it on the small portable printer she had packed in her bag 6 days ago because she packed for contingencies rather than optimism. She needed Jude. She needed him before Monica was awake, which meant before 6:30 at the latest, which meant now. She went to his door, knocked twice very quietly, waited. 15 seconds. The door opened. He was awake, clearly had been awake for some time. He looked at her with the eyes that had sharpened past exhaustion and arrived somewhere colder and more focused. And he stepped back from the door without a word, and she came in. She put the printed pages on the desk. "Read this," she said quietly. "All of it." He read. She waited. It took 6 minutes. He was thorough, and he was the kind of reader who went back and reread the parts that mattered rather than moving forward before he'd fully absorbed them. She watched his face. It did not change in any large way. The changes were small, interior, the kind that meant things were being moved around and placed differently inside a mind that was reorganizing its recent past. When he finished, he put the pages down and said, "Carl Briggs." "Yes." "She was introduced to me by Carl Briggs." His voice was very quiet. 18 months ago." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "He's been pushing into my Eastern distribution for 3 years. I've been managing it. I thought I was managing it." He looked at the pages. "He decided to manage it differently." "It appears so." "And Monica is a professional," Gemma said. "This is not her first time, and Briggs is not the first person to have employed her. The compound came from a controlled supply chain. She has infrastructure behind her that goes beyond your household." Jude absorbed this. The way he absorbed it steadily, without the destabilizing emotion that most people would have brought to the discovery that their fiancé was a hired instrument of a business rival, told her everything she needed to know about how he had built what he'd built and survived what he'd survived. "What do you need from me?" he said. "I have someone arriving at 7. He's going to need your cooperation to detain her legally. I'll have the toxicology documentation by 9. Combined with Nola's log, my photographs, and the compound analysis, it's enough for a criminal hold and more than enough for what comes after." "What comes after?" he repeated. "That's your decision to make," she said carefully. "I can get her detained and documented. What happens to Briggs is a separate question and not one I'm positioned to answer." He looked at her with a flat, measuring expression, and she held it without flinching, because she had been looked at that way before, and it was important in those moments not to be the first one to look away. "You're telling me you know exactly what I'll do with Briggs," he said, "and you're making sure you don't know it officially." "I'm telling you that my job ends with Monica Reeves in custody and enough evidence to keep her there," Gemma said. "What happens in the other half of your life is not something I have jurisdiction over." A silence. Then the smallest possible exhale, not quite a laugh, but the ghost of one. "You're very precise," he said. "It helps." He nodded. 7 o'clock. He looked at the pages again. Then he looked up. "Nola is not to be in the house when this happens." "Agreed. I'll have Marcus take her to school early. She won't question it if I ask her myself." He paused. "She trusts me, even now, after everything." He said it like it was something he hadn't earned and was determined to change. "I'll talk to her before she leaves. Tell her it's almost over," Gemma said. "She'll understand." "She understands everything," Jude said, and the way he said it, with a weight that was equal parts pride and remorse, stopped Gemma for just a moment before she collected herself and moved on. She left his room at 6:03. She went downstairs. She made coffee, real coffee, not the decaf substitute, because today, of all days, Jude Valentine deserved coffee that was actually coffee, and she stood in the kitchen and she waited. Nola came down at 6:15. She saw Gemma and read the room in approximately 4 seconds. Her eyes went from Gemma's face to the kitchen, to the window, to the clock on the wall, and back to Gemma's face, and in those 4 seconds, she processed enough to say simply, "Today." "Today," Gemma confirmed. Nola nodded. She sat at the kitchen table and she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Is my dad scared?" Gemma thought about how to answer that honestly. "He's on," she said, "in the way that people are when they realize the danger was never what they were watching. He's also," she paused, "he wants to fix it, and he wants to protect you. Those are the 2 things that are driving him right now." "He can't protect me," Nola said. Not bitterly, just accurately. "He didn't even know I needed protecting." "He knows now." Nola looked at her hands. "I don't need protecting anymore. It's basically done." She said it the way she said most things, factually, without self-congratulation. Just the clean arithmetic of a situation assessed honestly. "I just want to go back to being 7. Gemma set a glass of orange juice in front of her without being asked. Nola looked up. Can I go back to being 7? Yeah. Yes, Gemma said. I think that's exactly what you get to do now. Jude came down at 6:22. He looked at Nola with an expression that had been entirely stripped of its public armor. No calculation, no control, just the open face of a father who had almost lost something and was not yet past the almost. He crouched beside her chair the same way he had the night before and said, I need you to go with Marcus this morning. Go to school. Have a normal day. Nola looked at him with those eyes. Is it going to be okay? Yes, he said. Not performance, not comfort, certainty. How do you know? Because someone very competent is handling it. He glanced up at Gemma briefly. And because you were smart enough to find her. Nola looked at Gemma. Something passed between them. Not words, not even an expression exactly, just a recognition. The kind that forms between people who have been through something together and do not need to narrate it to know it happened. Okay, Nola said. She slid off the chair. She picked up her bag from its hook, and at the door she stopped and turned and said to no one in particular, and both of them specifically, I'll be back at 3:15. She left. The house was very quiet after that. At 6:58, Monica came downstairs. Gemma heard her on the stairs, the particular rhythm of someone who had made a decision overnight and was moving with it this morning. Not the unhurried glide of Monica's normal mornings, something more purposeful. Gemma was at the sink, and she kept her back to the doorway and her hands busy, and she did not react to the sound. Monica came into the kitchen. She went to the coffee machine. Gemma tracked everything in her peripheral vision and in the reflection of the dark window above the sink, which gave her a clean angle on the counter and on Monica's movements and on the left cabinet beneath the machine. She watched Monica start the brew cycle. She watched Monica's right hand move toward the cabinet. The cabinet opened, and Monica went very still. 3 seconds of stillness. The kind that was not surprise but verification, confirming something the body had already known before the eyes caught up. She had noticed. Not that the bottle was different, the replacement was visually identical, but something, the angle, the position, something fractional and almost imperceptible that her trained, paranoid, professionally calibrated attention had registered as wrong. Gemma did not move, did not change her breathing, did not alter anything about the pace or pressure of her hands on the dish she was washing. Monica straightened. She did not take the bottle. She closed the cabinet. She started the brew cycle, and she turned and she looked at Gemma with a smile that was exactly as warm as all her other smiles and said, Good morning, Claire. Did you sleep well? Very well, thank you, Gemma said. She turned from the sink with the relaxed expression of a woman whose conscience was empty. Can I make you breakfast? Just coffee, Monica said. Thank you. She left the kitchen with her phone in her hand, and Gemma listened to her footsteps cross the hallway, and she heard the slight lowering of Monica's voice as she made a call, and she did not catch the words, and she did not need to. Monica knew. Not everything, but enough. Gemma dried her hands. She pulled out her phone and sent one text to Rourke Accelerate. His reply came in 40 seconds. 2 minutes out. She walked to the hallway. Jude was at the bottom of the stairs. He looked at her, and she gave him a single small nod, the kind that said now, without saying anything, and he straightened, and the public armor came back up, and he became, in the space of one breath, the man who ran half of New York. Monica came out of the sitting room with her phone at her side and her smile in place, and something behind her eyes that was moving very fast. Jude, she said, warm, unbothered. I was thinking we should talk about the wedding venue today. I know you've been putting it off, but… Monica. His voice was not unkind, it was simply finished. The voice of a man who had run out of performance. Stop, she stopped. The smile held for 2 more seconds, a testament to how good she was, and then it didn't. I don't know what she told you, Monica said, quietly. Her eyes moved to Gemma, and in them was something that had no warmth and no performance, and was the first completely honest thing Gemma had seen on her face. But whatever it is, you should consider the source. Her name is Gemma Elliston, Jude said. She was at the Whitmore Gala 6 days ago. My daughter approached her. A pause. My 7-year-old daughter, Monica. Who has been watching you put thallium sulfate in my coffee every morning for 3 months and couldn't get a single adult in this house to listen to her? The silence that followed was the loudest thing Gemma had heard in 6 days. Monica's face did something complex. The calculation was still there, still running, but now it was running on a different problem, not how to maintain the story, but how to exit it. Her eyes went to the front door, to the hallway, to Jude, to Gemma. "You don't have anything," she said. Her voice had shed all the warmth now. What was underneath was professional and cold and very precise. A child's handwritten list and a new housekeeper who broke into your personal records. That's not... The doorbell rang. Monica went completely still. Jude did not move. Gemma walked to the door and opened it, and Rourke stepped in with 2 other people behind him, and he showed Monica credentials that she looked at with the eyes of someone who had looked at credentials many times before and knew exactly what they meant. And he said, "Ms. Reeves, I have a warrant for your detention pending investigation into the poisoning of Jude Valentine and the related deaths of Gerald Hartwell and Thomas Wren." The name Hartwell hit her. Gemma watched it land, watched something shift behind Monica's eyes. Some calculation about how much they had, how far back they had gone, how airtight this actually was, and she watched Monica make the decision. "I want a lawyer," she said. Her voice was perfectly composed. "I'm not saying anything else." "That's your right," Rourke said. He moved her toward the door with the practiced efficiency of someone who did this professionally, and Monica walked with the controlled poise of someone who was not done yet, not resigned, not broken. Simply regrouping, and at the door she turned and looked at Jude one final time. "You were never supposed to find out," she said. Not an apology, not a confession, just a statement of the original plan offered cleanly, almost professionally. "You were supposed to just go." "I know," Jude said. His voice was very quiet. "That's what makes it what it is." She went. The door closed. The house was quiet in a completely different way than it had been quiet before. The previous quiet had been the quiet of something concealed. This was the quiet of something removed, the specific, slightly disorienting silence of a house from which a long-held tension had just been extracted. Jude stood in the hallway for a moment with his hands at his sides. Gemma did not say anything. Some moments required the simple courtesy of being allowed to exist without narration. Then his phone rang. He looked at it. His jaw tightened, a specific tightening that told her it was a name he recognized and had been expecting. "Briggs," he said, not to her, to himself, to the phone and the name on it, and everything that name now meant. He answered it. He said, "Carl." Nothing else. He listened for approximately 10 seconds, and then he said, "I know," and then he hung up. He put the phone in his pocket and looked at Gemma with an expression that had closed off not toward her, but around something he was already moving to manage, and she understood clearly that the part of this story that was hers was ending, and the part that was his was beginning. "The documentation," he said, "everything you have. My contact sends the full toxicology report at 9. Nola's log is already logged with Rourke's team. I'll have everything to you by 10. He nodded. Then he looked at her, really looked in the way he hadn't yet, without the operational overlay, and said, "You came into my house under a false name to protect my daughter." "I came into your house because your daughter asked me to," Gemma said. "There's a difference." Was there. She did the work. She collected the evidence. She identified the target. She found me. She managed her own cover for 3 months while being 7 years old. I was a resource she deployed. She paused. Correctly, as it turned out. Something moved through his expression, not quite a smile, but the closest thing to one she'd seen from him that wasn't performance. "She's going to want to see you," he said, "when she comes home at 3:15. "I know. Will you still be here?" It was the same question Nola had asked her 2 nights ago in the kitchen, wearing pajamas with the exhaustion of 3 months behind her eyes. "Are you going to leave when this is over?" And Gemma had said eventually in a way that meant yes, but carefully had given the true answer wrapped in professional distance, which was perhaps the most honest thing she knew how to do. She looked at Jude Valentine, who was standing in the hallway of a house from which the danger had just been removed, but from which the damage remained, the damage to his body, to his trust, to the version of the past 18 months that would never be what he'd thought it was, and she thought about what eventually actually meant. "I'll be here at 3:15, she said. He nodded, once, like a man accepting something he hadn't realized he'd needed. She went upstairs to pack what she'd need for the day, the documentation, the timeline, the evidence chain that was going to make sure Monica Reeves did not walk out of a courtroom the way she'd walked out of everything before, and she moved through it with the clean focus of someone who knew exactly what the next 6 hours required. But underneath the focus, underneath the clean professional momentum of it, something else was running, quieter, less organized. At 3:15, a 7-year-old was going to walk through that front door and look for her. Gemma was going to be there, or she was not entirely sure what happened after that. She was not entirely sure what this thing she had built in 6 days, the trust, the recognition, the specific and unlooked-for attachment that she had not constructed and had not invited, and which had arrived anyway the moment a child in a white dress sat down beside her without asking, was going to become once the crisis that had created it was resolved. She was not sure, but she was going to be there at 3:15 to find out. And that she thought, for a woman who had spent 10 years making sure she was never the one waiting, was itself something entirely new. The toxicology report arrived at 8:53. Gemma read it at the kitchen table with her second cup of coffee, real coffee still because the substitution was no longer necessary, and small normalcies mattered after 6 days of nothing being normal, and she read every page twice the way she read everything that was going to be used as a weapon. Not for content which she already knew, but for gaps. For the places a skilled defense attorney would insert a finger and pull. There were no gaps. Her contact had been thorough in the way that people are thorough when they understand the stakes are not abstract. She compiled everything into a single ordered file: Nola's log, her photographs with timestamps, the toxicology report, the compound analysis with the supply chain notation, the documentation of Hartwell and Wren, and her own written account, and she sent it to Rourke at 9:04, and then sat with the quiet that followed the completion of a thing. It was done. The evidentiary part was done. Monica Reeves was in custody, and the documentation that would keep her there was now in the hands of people whose job it was to make sure it was used correctly. The lab had confirmed pharmaceutical-grade thallium sulfate. 2 prior victims were named and documented. The supply chain notation pointed at a network that went beyond Monica, and which other people with different tools than Gemma's, would now begin to dismantle. Her part was done. She knew this. She told herself this clearly the way she had always told herself, the clean endings of things, because clean endings were how you survived doing this kind of work without carrying all of it home with you. And then Jude Valentine walked into the kitchen and said, "Carl Briggs had a lawyer call me at 8 o'clock this morning, and the clean ending developed a crack." She looked up. What did the lawyer say? That Briggs had no knowledge of Monica Reeves's activities, that he introduced us socially and bears no responsibility for what she chose to do independently. Jude sat down across from her with the controlled calm of someone managing a very specific kind of fury. 18 months. He watched me deteriorate for 18 months, and he had lawyers ready to go before 8 in the morning. He's been preparing for discovery since the moment he engaged her, Gemma said. That's standard. He expected her to be caught. Eventually, these things always end, and he built his insulation well in advance. Can he be held? Not with what we have right now. Monica won't give him up. She's too professional, and giving up her client is not how people in her position survive long-term in that work. She paused. But the supply chain is a thread. The pharmaceutical-grade compound has a trail. It's not a trail we can pull in the next 24 hours, but it exists. Jude looked at the table for a moment. I'm not asking you to pull it, he said carefully. She understood what he was saying, and she understood just as clearly that it was exactly the kind of thing she had drawn a line around when she told him last night that her jurisdiction ended with Monica in custody. What happened in the other half of his life was not her territory, but she had been in this house for 6 days. She had sat on a stairwell step with his daughter. She had stood in his kitchen at 4 in the morning watching someone poison him, and the clean professional line that she had drawn with such care and intention had over those 6 days developed the particular problem that lines develop when human beings are involved. It had become complicated. I know you're not, she said. He looked at her. But you're thinking about it. I'm thinking that Carl Briggs pointed a woman with 2 confirmed kills at you, and your daughter lives in this house, she said. I'm thinking that's not a situation with a clean line. Jude was quiet for a moment. Then she's safe. Whatever happens with Briggs, she's safe. I have people. Your people didn't catch Monica. The silence after that was not uncomfortable. It was honest, which was its own kind of uncomfortable, but the better kind. No, he said, they didn't. He stood up, moved to the coffee machine and poured his own cup for himself without looking at it, with any of the wariness that he would have been right to feel, and which she was glad to see he didn't, and he stood there for a moment with his back to her. I want to tell you something, he said, and I want you to let me finish before you say anything professional. She waited. I have spent 20 years building something that required me to be very specific about who I trusted and in what capacity. He turned around. His face had the open quality it had shown last night in the hallway, the one without the armor. I have people who are loyal and people who are effective, and occasionally, rarely, people who are both. What I don't have, what I have not had, is someone who walked into a situation that had nothing to do with them because a child asked them to and stayed. He paused. That's not a professional category. I don't have a name for it. Gemma looked at him for a moment. Then she said, you don't need to name it. I'm aware of that. I'm telling you anyway. He set his cup down. I'd like you to consult for me, formally, retained your own terms. He held up one hand before she could respond. In the way that compromises the things you drew lines around last night, in the way that keeps Nola safe, audits my internal security, identifies the next Monica before she's in my house for 3 months. He paused. I have a 7-year-old daughter who ran a counter-surveillance operation on my fiancé because no one else was paying attention. That's not a situation and I'm willing to repeat. Gemma was quiet. She thought about her apartment, which she had left 6 days ago for a 3-night operation, and which was now full of the slight neglect that spaces accumulate when their inhabitants are somewhere else without planning to be. She thought about the Voss group, whose partner she had been surveilling at that gala work that was still technically pending, and which she had for the past week thought about 0 times. She thought about the version of her life that existed before a child in patent leather shoes had walked across a ballroom and sat down beside her. She thought about Nola coming home at 3:15. I'll think about it, she said. Jude nodded once. It was the nod of someone who had made his case and was prepared to wait, which was its own kind of statement about how he operated. He picked up his coffee and left the kitchen, and Gemma sat alone with the documentation file on the table in front of her, in the 9:04 timestamp on her, sent messages, and the quiet that a house makes when a threat has been removed from it lighter, somehow as if the walls themselves had released something they had been holding. At 11:15, Rourke called. Monica is talking, he said. No preamble. That was Rourke. Gemma straightened. About Briggs. Not directly, not yet, but she's not protecting him the way she was this morning. Something shifted. He paused. We told her about the supply chain, that we had identified the pharmaceutical source and were 3 steps from a name. It was a partial bluff. We're 2 steps, not 3, but she didn't know that. And she asked for a deal conversation, wants to know what's on the table before she decides what she's willing to say. He paused again, and in the pause was something that sounded almost like reluctance. Gemma, her lawyer is asking for you. She said nothing for a moment. Me specifically. By name, your actual name. She wants you in the room for the deal conversation. A beat, which tells us she's done more research on you than a household temp since at least last night. She knew who you were. She suspected, Gemma said. She didn't confirm it until this morning when Jude said my name. Either way, she wants you there. Why? Her lawyer says she'll only discuss terms if you're present as a witness. Something about trust. He said the word with the flatness of someone who found it professionally absurd in this context. She said, and I'm quoting here, she's the only person in this entire situation who played it straight. Gemma looked at the ceiling for a moment. Monica Reeves, who had walked into a room full of 500 powerful people and assessed all of them with practiced precision, had apparently arrived at the same conclusion about Gemma that Nola had. Different reasons, opposite sides of the table. The same essential recognition. When Gemma said, 1 o'clock, can you make it? She looked at the clock. It was 11:22. 1 o'clock gave her time to get there and be back before 3:15. I'll be there, she said. She got up. She moved through the house with the efficiency of someone in the last stage of a job gathering, closing, completing, and she was at the foot of the stairs, pulling on her coat when Jude appeared from his office. "Rourke," he said, not a question. "Monica wants a deal conversation. She requested my presence." Something moved through his expression, not quite surprise and not quite its absence either. "She knows who you are." "She knew last night. She confirmed it this morning." Gemma picked up her bag. "It might be useful. She's not going to give up Briggs for nothing, but if she gives up the supply chain, it builds the case that eventually gets to him regardless. And if she doesn't, she's still in custody with 2 confirmed prior deaths and a current victim who's alive to testify. The deal she gets without the supply chain is considerably worse than the one she gets with it." She paused. "She's a professional. She'll do the math." Jude looked at her for a moment. "You'll be back." "Before 3:15, she said. He nodded, and then he said, with the measured directness of someone who chose their words carefully because they meant them, "Thank you for all of it." It was 2 words that did not begin to cover what they were carrying, and they both knew it, and neither of them made the mistake of trying to add more. "I'll be back," Gemma said and left. The deal conversation lasted 41 minutes. Monica sat across the table from Gemma in a room that had the specific institutional quality of rooms designed to extract information, and she looked at Gemma with an expression that had shed every layer of performance and arrived somewhere beneath all of it that was simply purely intelligent. The face she actually had when she stopped wearing the one she used. She was, Gemma thought, genuinely remarkable in a way that had nothing to do with admiration. "You were at the gala," Monica said. The first thing she said before Rourke, before the lawyers, before any formal proceeding. Directly to Gemma. "Yes. I didn't clock you until the 3rd day. The coffee canister." She said it without self-pity, a professional noting where she'd lost the thread. "You switched to decaf." "Yes. And the bottle. The evening before last." Monica considered this. "That's good work," she said, and she meant it clinically the way you mean it when you're evaluating a method rather than expressing warmth. "How did she find you?" "The girl." "She scanned the room," Gemma said. "She determined I wasn't part of his world, and I wasn't part of yours, and she made a decision." Something passed through Monica's face that was not quite emotion but was adjacent to it. "She's 7 years old." "She is." "I didn't account for her," Monica said. "Just that. No elaboration. The purest possible professional admission of a miscalculation. I watched the staff, his associates, his security. I didn't—" She stopped. "She was supposed to be a child." "She was a child," Gemma said. "That didn't stop her." Monica looked at the table. Then she looked up and she said, "I'll give you the supplier. Full name, location, transaction records. Enough to close the network." She paused. "In exchange for the Wren and Hartwell charges being handled federally, not locally. Local prosecutors in that jurisdiction are—" She stopped, her mouth compressed. "They're not impartial." Rourke looked at his colleague. Something passed between them. "That's a federal ask," Rourke said. "I know what it is," Monica said. "I also know what I'm giving you is a network that goes further than one supplier and one client. The name I'm going to give you opens 12 cases in 3 states. She looked at Rourke with the calm of someone who had run this calculation several times and knew the value of what she was holding. "Make the call." The call took 19 minutes. Gemma sat in a waiting room and checked her phone once 2:27 and thought about what Monica had said. She was supposed to be a child. She had been a child. She still was. That was the entire point, the thing that Monica, for all her precision, for all her practiced attention to the variables in a room, had gotten wrong from the beginning. Not that Nola wasn't dangerous. She was in the most inconvenient possible sense. But she was dangerous because she loved her father with the total, uncomplicated, unconditional love that only a child can sustain, the kind that doesn't calculate risk, because risk is simply not a factor when the alternative is losing the person. Monica had looked at a 7-year-old and seen a manageable variable. She hadn't seen what was actually there. The door opened. Rourke said, "Federal agreed in principle. Pending formal arrangement, she's giving the name." Gemma stood up. She was back in the house at 2:58, 17 minutes to spare. Jude was in his office. She knocked once, opened the door, said, "Supplier's name is in federal hands. They'll work Briggs from that angle within the week." She paused. "Monica gets federal jurisdiction on prior charges. It's a reasonable arrangement." She gave them enough to build 12 cases. Jude processed this with the same absorbed calm he'd brought to everything. "Then Briggs, within the week," she said again. "That's a conservative estimate." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, with the particular quietness of someone arriving at a decision they have been circling, "Briggs will be managed, not by federal case. You understand? I told you, the other half of your life is not my jurisdiction." "Yes," he paused, "but I wanted you to know. Not because I need you to approve it, because you've been in this house for 6 days and you know where the lines are, and He stopped, chose the next words carefully. "I don't want there to be things between us that aren't clear." Between us. He had said it without apparent self-consciousness, and it landed in the room, and neither of them addressed it directly, and both of them understood it completely. "It's clear," Gemma said. The front door opened at 3:16. 1 minute late, which told Gemma that Nola had possibly walked faster than usual on the last block and then slowed down at the door because arriving exactly on time mattered to her. She came in with her bag on her shoulder and her coat half unzipped, and her eyes already moving the sweep. The assessment, the automatic inventory of the room that Gemma had watched her do a dozen times in 6 days, in which she hoped genuinely and with something close to ache would someday become unnecessary. Nola looked at Gemma, then at the house, then back at Gemma. "She's gone," she said. "She's gone," Gemma confirmed. Nola stood still for a moment, just stood in the hallway with her bag on her shoulder, and she breathed in and out twice, and the expression on her face was not triumph or relief, or any of the large dramatic emotions that the situation arguably warranted. It was something smaller and more total. The expression of someone setting down something very heavy after carrying it for a very long time and feeling in the absence of the weight, not lightness exactly, but the complicated return of a self that had been held too long in a single effortful position. Then she looked at Gemma and said with the absolute directness that was one of the most distinctly Nola things about her, "Are you leaving now?" "Not today," Gemma said, "but eventually." "Yes, eventually." She held the girl's gaze. "But I'll come back." Nola tilted her head slightly, the evaluating tilt that Gemma had learned to read as the precursor to a question that was going to cut straight to the thing no one had said yet. Why? It was the right question. Not when, not how often, why. Because Nola had been let down by adults who promised proximity and delivered absence, and she was not going to perform gratitude for a vague commitment when what mattered was its actual foundation. Gemma looked at her. "Because you mattered to me," she said. Simply, without architecture, without the professional distance she would have wrapped around anything this direct a week ago. Not as a case, not as a situation, you specifically, and your father. She paused. "And because I said I would." Nola considered this. "You kept every other thing you said you would do." "Yes." "Okay." She said it the way she said everything that mattered, quietly, with her full weight behind it, without ceremony. "Okay." She walked past Gemma toward the kitchen with the gait of someone who had decided the conversation was complete and was now interested in what was for snack, and Gemma turned to watch her go and found Jude standing in the hallway behind her. He had been there for at least the last minute. He had heard all of it. He looked at her with an expression that had no performance left in it and no armor, and none of the careful calibration of a man managing his circumstances. Just the face of a man who had almost died and hadn't, and was standing in his hallway with his daughter in the next room and was looking at the person who had made both of those things possible. "I meant what I said this morning," he said. "The offer stands." Gemma looked at him. At the house around them, the house that had been 6 days ago a location in a briefing document and was now something she could not reduce to that. The back stairwell where she and Nola had sat. The kitchen where she had stood at 4 in the morning watching The Worst Thing, and then again later watching a father hold his daughter like he understood what he'd almost lost. She thought about her apartment, her actual life, the Voss Group and the partner she'd been surveilling, and the professional infrastructure she'd built over 10 years into something lean and self-sufficient and entirely deliberately alone. She thought about Nola asking at 2 in the morning in her pajamas, "Can I go back to being 7? "Your terms were fair," she said. Jude's expression shifted not dramatically, but in the way that a room shifts when a window opens and the air changes. You'll consult. I'll consult. She held his gaze. But I need two things clearly understood from the start. Name them. Nola's safety is not negotiable, not a variable, not something we balance against operational considerations. It's fixed. If at any point I assess that she is at risk from your world that cannot be managed, I will tell you and you will act on it. Agreed, he said, without hesitation. The word came out with the weight of someone who had already arrived at that position independently. And I work my way, my methods, my timeline, my judgment on what requires my direct attention. You can brief me and I'll advise you, but I don't take direction. Jude looked at her for a moment. And then he said with the quiet amusement of someone who has recognized a kindred quality in an unexpected place. I don't take direction either. We'll get along fine. From the kitchen, Nola's voice, there's no orange juice. Jude's expression completed the thing it had been doing, landed finally in something that was simply genuinely warm, and he called back. I'll have it ordered, in the voice of a father talking to his daughter on a normal afternoon, and Gemma heard in that exchange the sound of a house returning to itself. She stayed for dinner. She did not plan to. Nola asked directly with the characteristic Nola economy of not dressing a want in anything other than the want itself, will you stay for dinner? And Gemma said yes before she'd completed the calculation of whether that was a reasonable thing to do. It was a small dinner. Jude, Nola, Gemma, and the quiet of a table that had been relieved of something enormous. They talked about ordinary things, Nola's school project on migratory birds, which she described with the same focused precision she brought to everything and which made Jude smile in a way Gemma suspected had been uncommon lately. A film Nola wanted to see, whether the building across the street was being renovated or demolished. Normal things, the kind of things that feel almost ceremonial in their normalcy after a period of sustained terror. At one point, Nola looked up from her food and said to no one specifically, I was really scared the whole time. I want to say that out loud because I didn't say it before. Jude set his fork down. I know, he said, and I am so sorry, Nola, that you carried it alone, that I didn't. You didn't know, Nola said, patient, forgiving in the complete way that children are capable of when they love someone. She made sure you didn't know. That wasn't your fault. She paused. But I need you to know that I was scared, because I think the story of it would be wrong if that part wasn't in it. The room was quiet for a moment. It's in it, Jude said. His voice was rough. I promise, it's in it. Nola nodded satisfied and picked her fork back up. Gemma looked across the table at a father who had almost been taken from his daughter by a patient and professional cruelty, and a daughter who had refused to let it happen with nothing but her own attention and courage and the willingness to keep going when no one believed her. And she felt something resolve inside herself that had been unresolved for longer than the past 6 days. Something that had been standing just outside of what she'd allowed her life to contain. She left at 9. Nola walked her to the door solemnly with ceremony, the way you see children walk important guests out when they have decided the departure deserves to be marked. At the door, Nola said, Tuesday. Gemma looked at her. Tuesday. My dad has a thing in the morning, but he'll be back by noon, if you wanted to come for lunch. A pause. Carefully neutral the way she was carefully neutral about the things that were not actually neutral at all. I have the second half of my bird project to finish. You could help. Gemma looked at her, this extraordinary, exhausting, remarkable child who had walked across a ballroom and changed the direction of both their lives, and said, I'll be here at noon. Nola nodded, as if it had never been in question, as if she had known from the moment she sat down next to a stranger at a gala and said, Can I sit with you, that this was exactly where both of them were going to end up. She went back inside. Gemma stood on the step for a moment in the evening air. 6 days ago, she had been a woman who kept herself carefully separate from everything that could become a weight, a claim, a reason to stay. She had built that version of herself brick by brick over 10 years, and she had been very good at living inside it. She walked down the steps to the street. She looked back once at the house, at the light in the second floor window, where Nola was probably already at her desk with her bird project and her watchful eyes and her old watch on her wrist, and she thought about Tuesday, about noon, about a little girl who had chosen her out of 500 people because she was the only one who was actually there. She started walking. She had spent 10 years making sure she never needed anyone, and no one needed her back, and she had been very successful, and she understood now with the particular clarity that only arrives when something has already changed profoundly and quietly and completely alone. That was over now. A 7-year-old had ended it with 4 words in a folded piece of paper, and Gemma Elliston, fixer professional, the woman near the east wall, was walking home through the city thinking about Tuesday, and she was not, for the first time in a very long time, walking toward nothing.